The rain had not yet begun when Eleanor Harcourt realized she was being watched. Politely, discreetly, and with that quiet pity reserved for those who have fallen farther than society thinks proper. The ballroom of Lady Pennington's spring assembly shimmered with candlelight, its chandeliers trembling slightly as though in sympathy with the faint tremor of humiliation running through Eleanor's bones. She had sewn her gown herself, stitching over frayed seams with careful hands, but even her neat work could not disguise the wear. A gleaming ribbon here, an extra flourish of lace there, small, valiant attempts at dignity. None of it fooled seasoned eyes. A pair of matrons lowered their fans as she passed, their whispers slicing the air with surgical precision. Tragic, a Harcourt girl reduced to seeking employment, one murmured. Her father's debts were astonishing. A fall of that magnitude is rarely recoverable. Eleanor kept her posture straight, her chin lifted in the manner her mother once praised. But the words had weight, and she felt each one settle on her shoulders like wet wool. Tonight was meant to secure her future, or at least postpone her collapse into obscurity. She had hoped for quiet inquiries, offers of a governess position or perhaps a companion role in a respectable household. Instead, familiar faces turned aside, offering polite nods instead of conversation. Potential patrons smiled thinly, as though fearing misfortune itself might be contagious. Even the musicians, absorbed in their waltz, seemed to play with an undercurrent of sympathy. Eleanor forced herself toward the refreshment table, intending to claim a moment of solitude, but halted when she spotted him. Lord Crispin Fairley, her once suitor, the man who had spoken tenderly of futures and promises before retreating the moment her family's ruin became public. He stood beside a young woman whose gown sparkled like a confection of pearls and silk. Eleanor watched as he offered his arm, his expression warm and adoring, as though he had never uttered a word of affection to anyone else in his life. When his gaze slid across the room and met hers, he acknowledged her with a shallow inclination of the head. No warmth. No recognition. Nothing. Eleanor felt something inside her shift, not break, but settle with resigned clarity. She was invisible to him now. She was invisible to them all. A rustle of skirts near her elbow drew her attention. An elderly woman, draped in amethyst satin and crowned with an impressive plume of ostrich feathers, leaned closer. "My dear," the dowager whispered, "your composure does you credit, but you do not belong in this room any longer. The world has shown you its teeth. It is time you learned to bite back." Eleanor blinked, uncertain whether the remark was insult or encouragement. The woman's sharp eyes softened. "I know of a place where dignity may be preserved, even regained. The widowed Duchess of Rothwell is in need of a companion, educated, well-spoken, and discreet. You fit the requirements." The words were both rescue and rebuke. Eleanor thanked the dowager with quiet grace, though her stomach fluttered with shame. A position as companion was respectable, yes, but it was employment nonetheless, an unambiguous signal of her fall from society's favored ranks. By dawn, she had accepted. Within the week, she found herself perched inside a rattling carriage bound for Rothwell Court in Yorkshire, her meager belongings packed in a single trunk. As the landscape shifted from the dense soot of London to rolling green hills, she felt an unexpected ache, the kind that comes when one is leaving not just a home, but a former life. Her arrival at the estate felt like stepping into another world. Rothwell Court rose from the mist like a sleeping giant, grand, stone-built, and softened by age. Ivy clung to its walls, and sprawling gardens stretched toward the horizon. Yet despite its beauty, there was an unmistakable heaviness, as though the estate itself breathed a long, weary sigh. The Duchess received her in a sun-drenched sitting room, her frail hands adorned with rings that glinted like tiny constellations. She greeted Eleanor with genuine warmth, studying her with the affectionate scrutiny of someone who had learned to value character over circumstance. Their conversation was brief but encouraging, and Eleanor sensed, for the first time in months, the faint stirrings of belonging. She toured the halls under the guidance of a housemaid, marveling quietly at the portraits, the polished banisters, the scent of lavender that lingered in every corridor. But it was in one such corridor that her path crossed with his. The Duke of Rothwell, Lord Nathaniel Hawthorne, arrived earlier than expected. Tall, impeccably dressed, and carved from the kind of composure only aristocratic breeding could produce, he moved with unhurried certainty. His presence struck her like a sudden gust of cold air. Eleanor stepped aside, prepared to curtsy, but he halted before her, his gaze sharp and assessing. "You are new," he said, not as a question but a statement weighted with displeasure. "Explain yourself." She bristled at the command yet answered calmly. "I am companion to the Duchess, your Grace. I arrived this morning." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps irritation, but he masked it with swift, firm authority. "Do not question me," he ordered, his voice low and unyielding, as though he had already anticipated defiance. Eleanor froze, not from fear but from the startling realization that this man, for all his poise, was profoundly unsettled by something he refused to name. She dropped her gaze, offering the obedience he seemed to expect. Yet the silence between them hummed with something unspoken, something taut as a bowstring. He continued past her, his footsteps echoing against the stone floor. Only once he disappeared around the corner did she exhale, steadying herself. The encounter left her heart beating far too quickly for comfort. But it was later that evening, as she walked past the servants' quarters, that she heard whispers drifting through a half-open doorway. The staff spoke quietly, unaware of her presence. "The scandal will reach London soon," one said. "If it does, the Duke's position is finished." Another voice replied, "He will not allow anyone, especially some new companion, to interfere." Eleanor's breath caught. Something dangerous simmered beneath the polished surface of Rothwell Court, something that threatened not only the Duke's future but the fragile stability she had just begun to grasp. She stepped away from the door, the echo of his earlier command lingering in her mind. "Do not question me." Yet even then, at the very beginning, she knew she would. Eleanor rose before dawn each morning, compelled less by duty and more by the peculiar restlessness that had followed her since overhearing the servants' whispers. In the pale hush of early light, Rothwell Court felt almost gentle. The corridors, so imposing by day, breathed softly in the quiet. The Duchess often preferred to take her breakfast by the window of her private sitting-room, and Eleanor accompanied her with unwavering attentiveness. She read aloud from newspapers and novels, always mindful of the Duchess's fragile health. Yet beneath the surface of those peaceful mornings lay an undeniable tension, an unspoken awareness that the Duke watched her more closely than was necessary. Not with affection nor suspicion alone, but with a calculating introspection she could not decipher. It was on her third morning that Eleanor received her first token of trust. The Duchess pressed a small silver chatelaine into her palm, its chain cool and delicate. "A companion should have the means to manage her work properly," her Grace murmured, offering a thin smile. "And I have observed your conduct these past days. You possess steadiness. I find that rare." The gift was more than an ornament, it was a symbol of acceptance. Eleanor bowed her head in gratitude, though her heartbeat fluttered with the pressure of new expectations. She slipped the chatelaine onto her waist, its subtle weight reminding her that she now held a place, small though it may be, within the fabric of the household. Not an hour after receiving it, she crossed paths with the Duke again. He stood beside a tall window overlooking the eastern lawn, reviewing estate ledgers. His posture, straight, unsparing, suggested a man accustomed to grim calculations. When he heard her approach, he turned with a look that might have been annoyance or simply the habitual sternness that ruled his expression. His gaze flicked to the new chatelaine, and something in his bearing tightened. "My mother gives generously when it pleases her," he remarked. "I trust you will not let her favor cloud your judgment." Eleanor met his eyes, refusing to shrink. "I intend to serve her faithfully, your Grace, with or without tokens." He regarded her for a long moment, as though weighing her very soul. "See that you do." His dismissal was gentle in tone yet edged with an authority that left no doubt. Still, she sensed a shift, a subtle curiosity beneath the rigidity. Days unfolded in a careful rhythm, each moment brushing against the Duke's presence in ways that both unsettled and intrigued her. She discovered his temper was less about anger and more about vigilance. He carried his responsibilities like a soldier bears armor, worn so long it becomes indistinguishable from flesh. His interactions with tenants were cordial but distant, his conversations with the steward curt and efficient. And yet, on one afternoon, Eleanor found him lingering near the nursery wing, listening to the laughter of visiting children with an expression she could not name, something wistful, something wounded. He departed the moment he saw her, but she stored the image away, uncertain why it pierced her so deeply. The first true fracture in his composure came during a small gathering hosted by the Duchess. Several local gentry had been invited for tea, and Eleanor, assisting at her employer's side, found herself fielding polite questions from guests intrigued by the appearance of a young companion. Her manners were impeccable, her responses measured. But when talk turned to the condition of the Rothwell tenants, those struggling with rising rents and poor harvests, she answered with unvarnished honesty. "The families fare worse than they admit," she said. "Pride keeps them silent, but their hardships are real." A ripple of discomfort passed through the room. The Duchess's expression froze, and a murmur rose among the guests. The Duke, who had entered quietly moments before, fixed Eleanor with a look sharp enough to slice the air. It was not anger alone, it was exposure, as though she had revealed more than she understood. When the guests departed, he approached her with deliberate calm. "You presume much," he said. "A companion is not at liberty to discuss estate matters." Eleanor stood her ground. "If truth unsettles, Your Grace, that does not render it improper." For a fleeting second, she saw something flare behind his eyes, a mixture of fury and admiration so entwined she could not separate one from the other. "You tread dangerous ground," he warned. "Do you understand that?" She did, yet the words she offered were softer than her pounding heart. "Only if honesty has become a danger." He turned away abruptly, leaving her with the echo of a conflict neither of them wished to name. It was that same evening, after fulfilling her duties to the Duchess, that Eleanor uncovered the first piece of the growing mystery. Passing the steward's office, she noticed the door ajar and a stack of documents left exposed on the desk. She hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The ledgers contained records of tenant payments, but the numbers were irregular, some duplicated, others conveniently missing. A series of notes, signed by the steward, authorized expenses that made no sense. Her breath shortened. These were not small mistakes. They were deliberate alterations, crafted to conceal the withholding of funds meant for estate repairs and tenant relief. The realization struck with chilling clarity. The steward's corruption endangered not only the tenants but the Duke himself, for any scandal tied to Rothwell would fall squarely upon his shoulders. As she examined the papers, footsteps approached. Eleanor closed the ledger, but not quickly enough. The Duke entered, his expression darkening. "What are you doing here?" His tone was quiet, too quiet. Eleanor steadied herself. "Your Grace, these records are inaccurate. They jeopardize the estate." He strode forward, seized the ledger, and scanned it with a furrowed brow. For the first time, she saw something crack in his composure. Not rage, fear. "You know nothing of what this means," he murmured, more to himself than her. "Nothing of the burden of a name that cannot be allowed to fall." His shoulders, usually held with rigid certainty, seemed to bow beneath the weight of the revelation. Eleanor dared a single step closer. "Then let me help." The words escaped before she could recall them, and she felt her pulse race. The Duke lifted his gaze, and in it she saw exhaustion honed to steel. "Help is not what I require," he replied. "Control is." Yet his voice wavered, betraying the truth he fought so desperately to conceal. A knock sounded at the door before he could say more. A footman entered with a sealed envelope addressed to His Grace in bold, official script. The Duke took it, breaking the seal with a slow, reluctant motion. His eyes flicked across the contents, and every trace of color drained from his face. "A summons from London," he said, his voice barely audible. "The matter will not remain buried." He closed the letter, his jaw tightening. Eleanor felt the gravity of the moment settle between them. The scandal was no longer a whisper. It was coming for him, swift, merciless, and unstoppable. And whether he welcomed it or not, she was now entwined in its descent. The storm announced its arrival with a low, rolling growl, as though the sky itself were bracing for confrontation. Eleanor had been carrying a stack of correspondence to the solarium when the downpour began, sudden and furious. Rain battered the glass with a ferocity that transformed the usually serene chamber into a trembling prism of light and shadow. She stepped inside, intending only to shelter until the worst had passed, but froze when she saw him. The Duke stood near the far window, his silhouette framed by the violent dance of lightning. The letter from London, its summons ominous and unavoidable, hung heavily in his hand. He did not look at her immediately, yet she sensed he had been waiting for the storm as if its external tumult might drown the turmoil within him. She should have withdrawn. Every instinct trained by propriety told her so. Yet something stronger held her in place, perhaps defiance, or perhaps the quiet recognition that she had glimpsed a rare, unguarded piece of him the night he learned of the steward's corruption. "Your Grace," she said softly, placing the correspondence on a nearby table. "I can return later." He turned then, not with the cold dismissal she had expected, but with an expression suspended between fatigue and restrained emotion. "Stay." The single word, spoken without command, unsettled her far more than any order he had ever issued. A gust of wind pressed against the glass, momentarily dimming the lanterns. As the storm raged, the solarium felt strangely intimate, a world suspended from time and obligation. The Duke set the letter aside and clasped his hands behind his back, his gaze fixed on the restless gardens beyond. "London demands an explanation I do not yet possess," he said. "They suspect mismanagement, impropriety, an estate head unfit for his title." His jaw tightened, and Eleanor recognized the humiliation threading his voice. "If true, it would ruin me. But if false, it means someone within my own household seeks to undermine me." She stepped closer, compelled by the rare vulnerability he allowed to surface. "You inherited an estate already strained," she reminded him. "No one of sound mind would judge its current troubles without acknowledging the burdens placed upon you." He laughed then, short, humorless, but startling in its honesty. "You overestimate the mercy of society. They are far more inclined to question weakness than to understand it." She felt the truth of that keenly. Her own ruination had proven as much. "Perhaps," she said gently, "but not everyone is your enemy." When he finally faced her fully, a crack of lightning illuminated the sharp planes of his face, revealing lines of exhaustion etched deeper than his years should allow. "You presume again," he murmured. "And yet, you speak as though you know what it is to watch one's life unravel." Eleanor swallowed, the memory of her father's debts flickering through her mind like a ghost. She had witnessed ruin. She had lived it. "I know what it is," she whispered, "to be judged without mercy." The Duke's gaze softened by degrees, the storm reflecting in his eyes. "Tell me," he said quietly, "what it cost you." She hesitated, feeling the weight of the moment. But the storm battered the solarium with such force it felt like a cocoon for confessions long caged. "It cost me my standing, my suitors, my home, and nearly my sense of self," she said. "Each loss felt like a fresh humiliation. I came here not to rise again, but to stop falling." The Duke's breath caught, faint but unmistakable. "Humiliation," he repeated. "Yes, I know that word too well." Another flash tore across the sky, followed by thunder that rattled the glass. He moved closer, abandoning the safe distance he always maintained. She could feel the tension radiating from him, the tension of a man who had spent his entire life mastering silence, only to find himself cornered by truth. "Miss Harcourt," he said, voice low, "I fear I have become a man driven by command because anything less feels like surrender. I cannot afford surrender." She held his gaze, her heart thudding painfully. "Command has its place," she said, "but so does trust." The word lingered between them, fragile yet potent. He exhaled slowly, the sound almost a confession in itself. "Trust," he said, "is a luxury I cannot control." When he spoke the next words, they were nearly lost beneath the storm. "You see through me, Eleanor. That is what I cannot command." Her name on his tongue felt like a physical touch, unexpected, electrifying, forbidden. She steadied herself, though her pulse betrayed her. "Do you wish I did not?" she asked carefully. A question with no safe answer. He took another step forward, closing the distance to mere inches. She could see the tension in his shoulders, the uncertain rise and fall of his breath. "I wish—" He stopped, searching for the discipline that had served him all his life. "I wish you were not so willing to stand before me when everyone else steps aside." She understood then. He feared not her judgment, but her presence, her persistence in seeing the man beneath the title. "I stand," she said, "because you do." Something in him faltered. His hand lifted, almost unconsciously, as though drawn to her cheek. Eleanor felt her breath catch, felt the warmth of his nearness. But at the last moment, he withdrew, hand falling rigidly to his side. "Forgive me," he said hoarsely. "I forget myself." Yet she knew he had remembered himself too well. The Duke would rather fracture his own heart than act against honor. That restraint, that aching denial, was more intimate than any touch could have been. He stepped back, reclaiming the space between them. "Miss Harcourt," he said, gathering his composure, "this scandal threatens every life on this estate. I must confront it, but I cannot allow others to be caught in its wake." She straightened, feeling a resolve she had not known she possessed. "Then let me help you prepare. The steward cannot be allowed to manipulate the truth. If London seeks answers, you must stand with evidence in hand." His eyes darkened with something like gratitude, but shaped by caution. "You would involve yourself in a matter that could cost you your position." "It would cost far more," she replied, "to remain silent while injustice prevails." For a long moment, he said nothing. Rain hammered the solarium roof like 1,000 urgent pleas. Then, with quiet conviction, he nodded. "Very well. We face it together." The words struck her with both solemnity and promise. She felt the storm outside begin to recede, though its echoes lingered like the residue of their shared confession. As they stepped from the solarium into the dim corridor beyond, the Duke paused, glancing back at the turbulent glass walls as if recognizing the significance of what had just transpired. Yet Eleanor sensed it even more keenly. Whatever lay ahead in London, whatever danger, whispers, or ruin awaited, they were now bound by something neither of them had intended. Something far more perilous than scandal. Something that would not be easily undone. The journey to London unfolded beneath a brooding sky, the coach wheels carving a determined path through mud and mist. Eleanor sat opposite the Duke, their knees nearly touching, though neither dared acknowledge the closeness. Silence held them hostage, not the brittle quiet of avoidance, but the charged stillness that forms when two people share both peril and purpose. The Duke's gaze remained fixed on the shifting landscape beyond the window, though Eleanor noticed how his hand tightened around the portfolio they had spent half the night preparing. Within it lay the evidence of the steward's deceit, neat and irrefutable, each document marked with her careful script and his steady corrections. Their joint labor felt like a pact whispered between storms, the sort of understanding neither of them could ever speak aloud. As London's outline rose from the haze, a tension settled over him, unmistakable and raw. "This city does not forgive easily," he murmured, more to himself than to her. Eleanor felt a pang, sympathy, frustration, something deeper she dared not examine. "Truth does not require forgiveness," she said. "It merely demands courage." He turned his head then, giving her a look that pierced deeper than any he had offered before. "Your courage," he said slowly, "has become a mirror I am afraid to face." She felt her breath falter, unsure how to absorb words so earnest. Before she could respond, the carriage halted at the discreet entrance of a political hall, where the summons demanded their presence. Inside, the corridors smelled faintly of ink and damp wool. Voices drifted from various rooms, sharp, impatient, eager for a scandal to devour. The Duke led her forward, every step purposeful, though Eleanor sensed the rigidity in his spine. He was a man stepping into an arena where lineage, pride, and vulnerability would be tested before an audience ravenous for spectacle. They were greeted by a small committee of officials whose expressions balanced cordiality and suspicion with expert precision. Eleanor remained at the Duke's side, her presence drawing faint arching of brows. Companions were rarely invited into such chambers, and certainly not young women whose very appearance challenged the edges of propriety. One official, a thin-lipped man with spectacles perched at the tip of his nose, wasted no time. "Your Grace," he began, "grave concerns have arisen regarding the administration of your estate. Funds misallocated, tenants neglected, repairs left undone." Each accusation echoed through the room, harsh and deliberate. The Duke absorbed them with a stoicism Eleanor admired, though she sensed the effort it cost him. When he finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of generations. "The accusations are based on forgeries," he said. "The steward acted without my knowledge." A murmur of doubt swept the room. Before it could swell, Eleanor stepped forward. The officials turned to her, startled. "With respect," she said, steadying her breath, "the discrepancies are neither ambiguous nor defensible. These documents," she gestured to the portfolio, "prove deliberate manipulation of ledger entries. Amounts were altered, signatures replicated, and funds diverted. The steward exploited the Duke's confidence for personal gain." Her tone cut through the murmurs like a blade. She handed the evidence to the officials with a poised calm she did not entirely feel. They examined the documents, and silence thickened as pages turned. Eleanor stood with her hands clasped before her, aware of the Duke beside her, still, composed, yet unmistakably affected. She could almost sense the gratitude he refused to express publicly. At last, the thin-lipped official leaned back in his chair. "These records are compelling," he conceded. "Action will be taken against the steward immediately." A ripple of relief traveled through Eleanor, though she remained composed. "However," the man added, his gaze shifting toward her with measured curiosity, "one must wonder how such thorough investigation was conducted, and by whom." The implication hung in the air, accusation or admiration, she could not tell. Eleanor lifted her chin. "By necessity," she replied simply. "Truth cares little for rank. It answers only to those who pursue it." Something in her response shifted the atmosphere. The officials exchanged looks, then finally dismissed them with a promise of formal resolution. As the Duke and Eleanor stepped into the corridor, the weight of the ordeal seemed to lift. Slowly, not completely, but enough for breath to return to their lungs. The Duke halted, exhaling a long, unsteady breath. "Miss Harcourt," he said quietly, "what you did in there was nothing short of remarkable." She shook her head. It was what needed to be done. He took a step closer, compelled by something he could no longer restrain. "You risked your position, your reputation." She searched his face, seeing not the Duke of Rothwell but the man, wary, grateful, changed. "Your Grace," she said softly, "some risks define who we become." His eyes softened, the stern mask slipping. "Do not call me that," he murmured. "Not now." Her pulse quickened. "What should I call you?" His voice was hushed, reverent. "Nathaniel." The name felt like a secret pressed into her palm, warm and dangerous. They stood in the quiet hall, the world narrowing to the fragile distance between them. He reached for her hand, slowly, as if offering her the choice to retreat. When she did not, his fingers closed around hers with a tenderness that stole her breath. "Eleanor," he said, her name spoken with the weight of all he had not dared confess, "do not question me, unless it is my right to love you that you dispute." His voice trembled on the final word. Her heart surged in a way she could neither control nor disguise. She felt the truth of her affection rise, undeniable, though fear lingered at its edges. "Nathaniel," she whispered, "your right is not what I question." He searched her face, hope flickering like a hesitant flame. "Then what do you fear?" She inhaled, steadying herself. "Only that love, like reputation, can shatter too easily." He lifted her hand to his lips, brushing a reverent kiss across her knuckles. "Then let us guard it together." The promise, spoken quietly in that echoing corridor, sealed a new beginning neither had dared imagine. And as they stepped out into the London dusk, the future, uncertain, fragile, luminous, unfolded before them, waiting to be claimed. The end.